I'm so thrilled to have Richard Goldfarb joining us this week. So Rich is currently a research professor at the Colorado School of Mines and the China University of Geosciences, Beijing, and is also an independent consultant to the exploration industry. So yes, he will be chatting to us today about the Great China Resource, which I'm super excited to learn about. So thank you so much for joining us. It's absolutely wonderful having you.
Oh, it's fun to be here, and I see a lot of names up there I know. So hello, everyone. And we have no quarantine here, and happy here. And let me talk about China. So I'm going to try sharing my screen. So I'm going to talk about China. Do we believe the numbers on the resources? Do we believe China's the #1 gold producer in the world? Why are there so many gold deposits in China? Why are they all over the place? And I'll give you my bias on what deposit types I think are real there and what I think are BS. And I've been in China for almost 30 years. And most importantly, I've learned to say no to drinking Maotai, which about kills you. And I think I have some Maotai pictures coming up. All right, so I've been in China for close to 30 years. It's been a real learning experience, especially learning to say no to Maotai and certain foods, and to see what I want to see and not be shown what they want to show me there. And we were like younger when we started there in the early 90s. China's been producing gold for more than 4,000 years. At the end of the Cultural Revolution, they were just producing a few tons per year. When I started there, it was just under 100 tons per year. You'd go to these mines, they'd be hand sorting in the mills. You'd have farmers out on the hillside sitting under cyanide leach pads with cyanide going up in the air and crops down below the leach pads. And it was pretty much a horror show. And it was a hell of a learning experience besides eating and everything else. Money, there were no credit cards or ATMs when I started there. Everything had to be paid for by cash. When I first started working in Xinjiang 25 years ago, to pay for rental cars and everything else, some guy would fly out from Beijing with a couple of shopping bags of cash, and you pay the rental cars, and everybody else with just stacks of cash. To travel around, the airports weren't everywhere yet. They had these roads that were just a nightmare. We went everywhere. We had police escorts because mainly there were banquets everywhere, and the police wanted free food and free Maotai. You drive for 3 days to get to some mine site. You go underground for 20 minutes, and then you'd have to fight to stay there because the police and everybody else who was underground wanted to come out for the banquet. So it was a real challenge back then. And we also knew nothing about China's ore deposits. If you try to look at the literature from the early 1990s, it's a horror show about what was known about China back then. The gold deposits, the orogenic gold deposits, were thought of as Archean gold deposits because half of the gold deposits sit in Precambrian rocks, and generally worldwide greenstone belts that are Archean have Archean gold deposits. So it was a whole puzzle to start putting together. The food was a nightmare to get used to. You never knew what you were getting. Luckily, you'd always have some people, some Australians here that would eat the noses and the ears and the other things off these lovely critters you would get. And even when they told you what you were getting, like the ass of a dry pan shang, who knows what the hell that is? But things were slowly improving. You could get around. One thing that never changed was the Maotai. There was no escape from the Maotai until probably the last 10 years. I mean, I thought I had to be polite when I started. There's videos of me my first year in China rolling down the pit at Bayanovo after starting out of lunch from too much Maotai. You'd get very hazy. Often to go underground, you had to drink Maotai at lunch with the mine manager, and you'd go underground and the geologist would be drunker than you, and you'd have to rappel down waterfalls on electric wires. And it's amazing we made it through. And the good thing is I've learned to say no. And in the last 5 to 6 years, China's cut back on its Maotai. There's beer, there's wine, and it's getting more civilized. And some of the good things there, I've been teaching at China University of Geosciences for a number of years. Other people from Australia have been coming there, Dave Cook, David Groves, and others, and working with the young economic geologists there, exchanging ideas, collaborating with the young people. We've learned a hell of a lot about China's mineral deposits, including gold, over the past 3 decades. One thing that I did learn early on, and is still worth keeping in mind, Chinese have smaller feet than most Westerners, and bring your own boots when you go to China. Otherwise, you'll be sitting in size 5 boots with your toes crawled up underneath the rest of your feet. And the boots they give you for safety are paper thin, so you just stub your toes everywhere on the ground. So bring your boots, but otherwise working in China has improved. When I started in China, though, all the big Western companies were in Beijing. Newmont, Anglo, Barrick all had offices, and now there are no Western gold mining countries left, and we can get in that in a little bit. So to get on to the gold story, China produced 460 tons of gold in 2016. China produced almost no gold at the end of the Cultural Revolution. By the early 1990s, they were up to 100 tons a year. 2016, they were the world's largest gold producer at 460 tons. They've decreased about 20% from 2016 to today. I think that's in a large part due to a lot of the Chinese companies, the major companies, government-run companies, are now exploring overseas in South America and especially Africa. There's been a lot of questions. Do I believe the tonnages from China? I think the production numbers are real. As you'll see in a minute, there's hundreds and hundreds of active gold mines in China, and many of these produce 1, 2, 3 tons of gold per year. So the numbers make really good sense to me. The reserves, the drill numbers, I think are all fiction. The Chinese government will tell in a given province, you must find this much gold in this year, and some of those numbers are just fake. You go to a mine and say, where did you come up with 100 tons of gold here? And they said, well, we did 1 drill hole. So the production is real, resource numbers are not. About probably 3/4 of the gold in China is orogenic gold. And as you'll see, I lumped the North China block type gold deposits, the Jiaodong type gold deposits as orogenic. And I also say the Carlin-like deposits in China are not Carlin-like deposits, but probably orogenic gold. The other 1/4 of the gold production in China is from intrusion-related gold deposits, skarns, and to a lesser extent, porphyry and epithermal deposits. The reason China's gold production really popped up after the Cultural Revolution was the Chinese government started a branch of the military called the Gold Army. These guys were quite interesting. I've worked with a bunch of them on many properties. They get up at 5 a.m. and do their jumping jacks and everything else. And their job was to find more gold. And basically, most of them were not the best geologists. It was an army branch that had 200 to 300,000 geologists. A lot of them were pretty head cases. Some were good, but a lot were sort of hurting. And I would say most of their gold discoveries, what we would call brownfields. They would go to where the local people had been mining since the Wing and Ming and Ding dynasties. They would close down and dynamite the properties, saying it wasn't safe. They would then take them over and give them over to China Gold or Shandong Gold or some of the government gold companies. And that's how a lot of the gold resources increased once the big companies, the Chinese companies came in and took these over from the local people and started developing these. If we look today at world gold production, I just got this from the World Gold Council, China is still the world's largest gold producer. Russia and Australia are pretty close to the same. There's still a question, does China really produce 370 tons per year? I strongly think so. After traveling around China for 30 years, seeing all these mines, there are hundreds of operations producing. So let's look at the geology and see why China is so gold rich. About half of China is made up of Precambrian blocks, the Tarim block, the North China block, and the South China block. In between these are a bunch of ocean basins that have closed between the blocks, as well as between Siberian block, the Kazakhstan block, and the Mongolian terrains. So we had all these closing oceans. We had half a dozen Tasman origins or Cordilleran origins, and all of these are enriched in Phanerozoic gold. And that's led to at least the orogenic and the intrusion-related gold systems being so widespread in China. So here's the orogenic gold distribution. And some people may say it's a bunch of BS, but these deposits down here I'll talk about in a little bit, are the supposed Carlin deposits. I would put them in the orogenic category. And these deposits here in the North China block, in the Precambrian craton, are Mesozoic orogenic gold deposits. Some people in China like to call them different types, Jiaodong type deposits, but these have all the characteristics of orogenic gold. So you can see orogenic gold is very widespread throughout the accreted terrains onto these Precambrian blocks, as well as within the North China block, and along a suture here in the South China block, where the Yangtze and Cathasia blocks pulled apart and came together many times, and this was very active in there. If we look at golden porphyries from a recent paper by Jiming Yang and Dave Cook, these are all the copper porphyries around China. They are generally very low gold porphyry deposits. There's only 5 porphyry deposits in China with more than 100 tons gold. 4 of these are in Tibet and Yunnan. They're the older Mesozoic deposits, not the very young copper deposits that you see here in South Central Tibet. So 4 of these are here. And I'll also mention there's one subduction-related porphyry called Desheng over here. But in general, porphyries are not big gold producers in China. And here's a recent slide from Noel White. And these are the epithermal deposits that are preserved in China. Probably about a third of these are actually orogenic gold deposits and not epithermal deposits. The epithermal deposits of Paleozoic age sit up here in Northwest China and Xinjiang. And the younger epithermal deposits sit along the eastern border of China, the eastern margin of China, where we had circum-Pacific events in the Jurassic and Cretaceous, which I'll talk about in a bit. So these are pretty much the epithermal deposits of China. Now, Asia and China didn't exist throughout much of the Paleozoic. North China, South China, Indochina, and other blocks of Tibet and Gansu and Southwest China were all attached to Gondwana, some of these to Australia or just off Australia, through the early Paleozoic. In mid-Paleozoic, though, these blocks, these fragments of Precambrian craton, started moving across the Paleo-Asian Ocean towards Siberia and Kazakhstan, which were blocks that had broken off from Rodinia and floated around this ocean for hundreds of millions of years. As they got close and we started closing these ocean basins, first with the Tarim, then North China, South China, Indochina, closing all these oceans with Siberia and Kazakhstan led to the huge gold endowment we see. And so really the growth of Asia and the formation of China began at about 300 million years ago. You think of it because it has cratonic blocks as an old Precambrian craton area, but basically it's sort of a bunch of accreted terrains that are actually cratonic fragments that did not start coming together until the middle of the Phanerozoic. So first, let me talk about some of the oldest deposits in China that are about 380 to 300 million years old that formed when Kazakhstan, Siberia, and Tarim started coming together, especially in the Devonian and Carboniferous. When they started coming together, we had oceanic arcs before North China came in, accreted to the Siberia craton and some of the inboard Mongolian terrains. One of these ocean arcs was Oyu Tolgoi, which is now just north of the China border. It was an oceanic arc in the middle Paleozoic, and 100 million years it accreted onto the margin of what would be the Siberian Craton. We can go just west of the Tarim Craton and look at Amalek, another great porphyry deposit, copper gold porphyry deposit with significant gold production. It was a continental margin arc. So it formed in the middle Tian Shan, which is now here in Uzbekistan, during the same period that we had the oceanic arcs off Mongolia. And along the area of Xinjiang and the Tarim Craton, we formed other porphyries that are now in Xinjiang, such as the Tua porphyry, which has been developed the last 10 years or so, and the largest epithermal deposit, a low sulfidation deposit in Xinjiang, that's about 70 million ounces. So when we look at all these, this is the picture in the middle Paleozoic. We had an oceanic arc here that 100 million years accreted Oyu Tolgoi, sort of like Cadia down there in Australia. We have continental arcs like Amalek here in Uzbekistan. Sort of like Bingham here in the US. And then we had here now in Xinjiang, deposits like the Ashi epithermal and the Tua porphyry. And these formed along the continental margin. They may be both oceanic and continental arcs, sort of like British Columbia off North America. You can see there are older pre-existing orogenic gold deposits. These are not related to China and this event. These are old events on the margins of Siberia, forming like the Suke log deposits and the Olympia deposits, and older deposits also in Kazakhstan. But after the Carboniferous, you notice these two ocean basins that close between Siberia, Kazakhstan, and Tarim. And it was the closure of these basins, metamorphism of these rocks, and transpressional movement that formed two huge and very important gold provinces in the Permian. And here you can see these. This is northeast Kazakhstan and goes into Xinjiang here. And these are the Permian deposits that you see in this part of Kazakhstan. And then we have this world-class belt that goes through Uzbekistan, through Kyrgyzstan, through Xinjiang, Gansu, and into southern Mongolia of Permian orogenic gold deposits. And this is mostly the South Tian Shan terrain. And when we look at this belt, we can see, at least in Central Asia, the world's largest orogenic gold deposit, Muruntau. We can see Zarmatan is probably 25 million ounces by now. Kumtar is about 25 million ounces. This is the South Tian Shan terrain, that ocean basin that was closed and metamorphosed. And these deposits continue into Xinjiang, China. And we have all these Permian deposits in Xinjiang. Here is Kumtar in Kyrgyzstan, and here are the South Tian Shan deposits. They're also in the central and northern Tian Shan, up here on the margin of the Junga Basin, and here in the Altai Shan. Basically, these deposits were much closer together when they formed in the Permian. We were looking at an active continental margin, like the Cordilleran margin of Western North America. But in the Triassic, we opened these basins, so these are more spread out now over much of Northwest China. When you look at these, those in the Altai and Tian Shan have significant greenfields potential. These Permian gold deposits are in pretty remote areas. A lot of these are military areas. So nothing's been really well developed here. When you get in between the Altai and Tian Shan, where those basins opened up, such as the Junga Basin, we have all these serpentinites and major faults, and it's much easier access. And there's been more development of these and more brownfields work. The largest district here is Hatu, which I had lovely bat soup and pig blood soup at, and barbecued sparrow probably 20 years ago. So we have these gold belts form in the Permian. And then as we move into the Triassic, North China approaches the Mongolian terrains. And we close this last branch of the Paleo-Asian Ocean. And we started having, along the north margin of the North China Craton, a lot of strike subduction and then strike slip. We formed Triassic deposits, latest Paleozoic to Triassic deposits like Wulashan, or up here in Northeast China, Jayapagu Belt was the largest gold producer in China up till about 20, 30 years ago. Classic slate belt laminated type gold deposits. And also in this, we formed the CS817 deposit. I just want to say one thing about that quickly here. It's located here. Here's Oyu Tolgoi now, that accreted arc with a copper deposit. Normally in China, historically, they've mined high-grade, low-tonnage deposits. As the world has changed to high-tonnage, lower-grade deposits for many orogenic deposits, China's been slow on that. But this one deposit is the one example in northern China, or in all China, I know, that is a giant, large tonnage, low-grade deposit. When I was first out here in the 90s, there was just a bunch of guys placer mining out here in the Gobi. Now there's, some people say 40 tons gold. China Gold now says more than 200 tons gold. Again, it's tough to understand the numbers, but they've been mining 4 to 5 tons of gold per year here for 7, 8 years. And they're mining 0.4, 0.5, 0.6 grams per ton. So this is a sort of a change for China. You normally don't see this, but they are moving in that direction in certain areas that are amenable to open pit mining. The same time that these late Paleozoic deposits were forming, as Tarim, North China, Siberia, Kazakhstan were coming together, South China started approaching North China, and Indochina broke off Gondwana and started approaching South China. And before these blocks became part of China, we closed ocean basins between these and formed more orogenic gold deposits at the same time. We formed these in the Chilean mountains, in the East Kunlun, and in the West Qinling. Chilean are the oldest of these, and they represent mid-Paleozoic collisions. And these are younger, late Paleozoic to earliest Triassic terrain accretions before eventually South China and India collide with North China. We have all these accreted terrains, and they're all gold bearing. The Chilean is the first collisions. And if we look at Chilean, you can see a series of deposits here. There's a very remote range. It's probably the least explored for gold of any areas in China, but it has significant potential. The geochronology, which is a problem in many places in China, is sort of all over the place from 400 to 220 million years. But there's enough reliable dates that seem to suggest that some of these deposits could be 400 million years, and the oldest deposits, gold-bearing deposits of any significance in China. There are no Precambrian gold deposits in China, as I said earlier. So we're looking at a series of accretions over a long time, significant gold that's been poorly developed, undeveloped here. But one deposit I want to show, one of the bigger ones, Tanjianshan, I just want to point out that Eldorado Gold had mined this up to about 5 years ago. They took out about 50 tons gold. And Eldorado is the last Western company to mine successfully gold in China. Companies have just given up because it's difficult to know who's in charge. The rules are always changing. Eldorado did really well here on 3 properties in China, in part because they had a good geologist in Beijing, Greg Collins, who wouldn't take any crap from the local governments and knew how to, tell them what was going on and just not take crap. And so Eldorado was successful on its 3 operations, in large part thanks to Greg. And they had a good team out here. And once they finally gave up, couldn't deal with the local authorities. And now, as far as I know, there's no large-scale mining by a Western company in China. So if we go from the Chilean up here down to West Qinling, this is a huge area of well-dated middle to late Triassic orogenic gold deposits. We had collision, we had to change the strike slip, and along these various sutures between the terrains, we have significant orogenic gold deposits. There's about 1,200 tons of gold. Many of these are gold antimony deposits. They look a lot like Fosterville in Australia. They all probably formed at 225 to 200 million years, though now new dating shows a few of these being late Mesozoic when nothing happened. There's questions regarding some of these phosphate dates. Everyone's dating all sorts of minerals now for phosphate. The dates just don't make geologic sense. 95% of the ages in here are Triassic. I don't believe the Cretaceous ages people are coming up with. People call these reduced intrusion-related gold deposits. That's crazy too, I think, because the intrusions are oxidized. And furthermore, we're just looking at shears along the margins of the intrusions like any old orogenic gold deposits. Some people like to call these Carlin-type deposits. These look nothing like Carlin-type deposits. They call them that because some deposits have antimony, some may have a little mercury, especially as you get down south. There's some limestone. Some of these have oxide gold that they've mined for decades or actually centuries, but these are definitely not Carlin deposits. One year, the Yangshan Belt in amber in particular was claimed to be the largest gold deposit in China. I went out there. They claimed it 300 tons of gold. There was one drill hole. They showed me a bunch of shear veins and phyllite out there. To me, that's not a Carlin deposit. However, because some of the mineralization's in the wall rocks and there is some thin limestone from where the leading edge of South China came in and collided with this basin, people like to call it Carlin deposit. It's probably a very small deposit, and there's no way this is Carlin deposit. So you got to be careful of what's going on when you hear these. There are two areas, though, of supposed Carlin deposits in China. One I just talked about, West Chinling, I don't believe, and then the late Triassic deposits down here in Guizhou province on the southwest corner of the Yangtze Craton. And Chinese workers working with Western workers have called in both places many, many papers on these Carlin-type deposits. And this is where they're located. These all formed in the late Triassic when the Indo-China block collided with the South China block. We had all these anticlinal uplifts on the carbonate platform with clastics on top of these, and the Triassic clastics and these anticlines along the reverse faults that were reactivated along this whole platform margin have deposits that some people call Carlin-like, some say, and I would say are more orogenic than Carlin-type. These deposits with mercury, antimony, gold go all the way down to Hanoi along the Red River Suture over here. This is, again, the basin that has all these Carlin deposits. There's supposedly 800 tons of gold in these. The dates are all 220 to 200 million years. Now there's phosphate dating. Some of these deposits are showing up as 130, 135 million years, but this was tectonically dead at the time. So it's very hard to see how these could relate to anything. There's no igneous rocks at the time, and there's no tectonics. People say, well, it's the same time the Pacific plate was going under China, but the Pacific plate rolled back in the middle of this block and not over here on the southwest edge of it. So it really doesn't make good sense. When we look at these Guizhou deposits, sure, it's along a rifted craton margin. Sure, there's reactivated regional faults that went from normal faults to thrust faults. There's some carbonate, and in the carbonate, there's replacement bodies, and there's low temperature deposits. But the given model now in Nevada is these are related to felsic magmatism. So if felsic magmatism is important for Carlin-type deposits, these are not Carlin-type deposits. There's no felsic magmatism. A lot of these have quartz veins and limited jasperoid. Quartz veins form from fluids under pressure. You don't see a lot of quartz veins in Nevada. Dolomite is stable. Illite is stable. Minerals that are not stable in Carlin deposits. The ore-forming fluid is CO2 rich. It's a different fluid than you see in Nevada. There's coarse pyrite, some with no gold-bearing rims, with a gold in the center of the pyrite. There's some visible gold. And Gene Klein's done a lot of fluid inclusion work. These are much higher pressure and temperature than Nevada. So are these kaolin deposits? My feeling is no, they're not. Many of the Chinese workers now say there's both orogenic and kaolin deposits here in the same area, because some are replacement style and some look very different than Nevada. But would we expect at the same time in the same place to form orogenic and kaolin deposits together? My guess is probably not. Most kaolin workers in the US now who have visited here in China say these are in-between deposits. They're in between kaolin and orogenic. And sure, they have features of both, but I don't know what an in-between deposit is. Is it a new classification of deposit? Are orogenic and kaolins the same? Most orogenics people don't believe form from magmatic fluids, and the world now thinks kaolins form from magmatic fluids. So there's still a lot of questions here, and I'm certainly in the orogenic camp on these and don't believe these are kaolin type deposits. One other thing that sticks out to me, this is what barren rock looks like in Nevada. This is high grade gold from the kaolin trend. It took miners, great prospectors like this guy, 100 years. They went all across Nevada. They found the skarns, the porphyries, the epithermal deposits. They made it to the Sierra, found the orogenic gold deposits. And it wasn't until the late 1970s that people recognized that, hey, there's another type of deposit out here called kaolin deposits that are difficult to find and have different features. But the deposits in China have been mined for hundreds of years. So were the Chinese better prospectors? Did they recognize these kaolin replacement style with no cesium gold in it? My guess is probably not. It just doesn't make sense. I think there's a lot of low temperature deposits. There's a lot of orogenic gold deposits that can be refractory. And who knows what kaolin style gold deposits really are, because there's kaolin type deposits, and what a kaolin style. I look at some of these papers in this recent reviews volume, those on China, I certainly think are epizonal orogenic deposits. There's papers on Southeast Asia kaolin deposits. Doug Kerwin has a recent paper on these explaining why they resemble typical epithermal deposits. So we have to be careful, and I'm not convinced Guizhou has kaolin type deposits. They certainly are very different than Nevada. So it depends on your definition. So that's really how China grew. In the last couple, well, maybe 180 million years, once China was all together, circum-Pacific margin tectonics took over and formed some of China's most significant gold deposits that are in the North China Craton, or North China block here. If you look what happened, 170 to 140 million years, we had subduction, we had magmatism, then the slab rolled back, we had extension and metamorphic core complexes and magmatism in the core complexes. Here you can see the core complexes that host the gold deposits, and you can see they're all along old structural boundaries is where we have these core complex uplifts. And the key thing is we're looking at very young gold deposits here in Jiaodong, here in the Qinling area, and here in North China that form in Precambrian rocks. You wouldn't go out to the Yulgan to look for Phanerozoic deposits. This is very unique. These are the areas of those basement uplifts in red where we have late Archean rocks coming through young Proterozoic cover. These are filled with 160 to 90 million year old intrusions and gold deposits that are mostly 130 to 120 million years old. I would say these are orogenic gold deposits. Some Chinese call these decretonic gold. Some call these Jiaodong type gold. If you want to have a local model, fine, but they resemble orogenic gold deposits everywhere, as you'll see here in a second. This area on the east side of North China Craton, Jiaodong is the biggest producer here in the North China Craton. The gold deposits, again, are about 125 million years old. There's probably estimated 4,000 tons gold. Who knows how real that is? I do believe the 70 to 100 tons a year per of gold production, probably close to 70 tons. There's 160 mines here. It produces 25% of China's gold or 2% of the world's gold. Most of these deposits sit along sheared margins of granitoids for a couple of hundred kilometers. You see a massive pyrite in a lot of these. There's a lot of K feldspar alteration besides carbonate and sericite. You can look and see how some of these sit on the margin of granitoids, and they often sit where there's, you can see fault jogs like many other orogenic type gold deposits. These are reworked as normal faults. They're originally thrust faults. They're reworked normal faults, which is a little unusual for orogenic gold, but all the other features are like orogenic gold. They have traced some of these out into the Bohai Sea. They've drilled some of these. One of these they announced a couple of years ago, 470 tons of gold that they claim they can mine for 500 ounce. But the fault sits under 700 feet of seawater, and then 1,500 meters below that. The deepest mines on land so far are 500, 600, 700 meters. So how realistic these numbers are something you have to sort of look at with a grain of salt. We can go from the east side to the south side of the North China block, same thing. We have sheared margins to granites. We also have a fold system here when South China collided with North China. And where this fold system has tined up, and we have shearing along the margins of the granite and developed strike slip faults. We have a whole series of orogenic gold deposits that have about 1,000 tons of gold, is some of the estimates. And instead of in the granites, most of this is in the sheared Precambrian gneiss, especially where it's been altered early by K feldspar and become more brittle. So where do the fluids and metals come from in North China? The orogenic model says host terrain should be devolatilized, but these were devolatilized to mostly granulite and upper amphibolite in the Proterozoic. So how do we form Phanerozoic deposits? Well, to begin with, the North China craton shouldn't be called a craton. It's the one craton on our planet that's died. Instead of 200 kilometers thick, it's only 50 kilometers thick. We've lost the subcontinental lithospheric mantle. There is no mantle there. It's only 50 kilometers thick. And then we have these basement uplifts all along the margins of the block. And what led to the decretionization? In the Triassic, we had subduction from the north, subduction from the south. The South China came in. And in the Jurassic, in the early Jurassic, as this was still going on, we had subduction from the Paleo-Pacific. We had a buttload of magmatism. That magmatism and associated fluids caused erosion of the lithosphere, and the lithosphere eroded, the crust thinned. We had basement uplifts. And in those basement uplifts, the granites went up. And those basement uplifts, though, in a very narrow time span, have orogenic gold. We have a lot of models on these. It's still difficult to understand how these form, but we do know the crust, this crust, the ancient crust can't be a source because it's been metamorphosed up amphibolite and granulite. Under the thinned lithosphere, though, we had a slab going down at shallow depths. Fluids probably could come up the slab and go into some of these faults, or fluids could go into the asthenospheric window here and then get remobilized somehow into these faults. But it's hard to see how these could be the source of fluids. It should be the sediments on the downgoing ocean crust. And the age of these does correlate with a major change in plate motion in the Pacific Basin, where the Pacific plate captured the Phoenix plate. All of a sudden, the plates in the North Pacific Basin changed their trajectory. We had strike slip along all the structures on both margins of the Pacific. And during that movement is when we formed the orogenic gold deposits. And we have the uplift here in North China block. And we also formed the gold deposits at the same time in Western North America and California, the Mother Lode, et cetera. Finally, We have intrusion-related deposits also forming in eastern China at the same time as we were subducting the Paleo-Pacific or Izanki plate. We had subduction up here below the terrains in northeast China, mostly forming polyporphyry deposits, probably from a lot of organic material going down from plates up here and over here. But we also, during slab rollback, have formed a series of epithermal deposits. And down here in southeast China, we have a copper porphyry belt that formed during subduction. We had slab rollback starting at 140 million years with a slab tear here at the top of the Yangtze Craton, where in these carbonate rocks, we have a bunch of porphyries, but mainly in the carbonates forming huge iron copper skarns with a huge gold endowment. And as this rolled back, we form a bunch of epithermal deposits here along the coast at 120 million years. Just looking at these quickly, when we go up to northeast China, during the slab rollback, most of these epithermal deposits are small. They're 120 to 100 million years old. They lie along the Russian border, and most of these are along the border with North Korea and continue into North Korea. And most of these are low sulfidation epithermal deposits. There's a few copper porphyries that are pretty small. And there's also one deposit that El Dorado worked on, White Mound, that Haley Keeble just finished a PhD on. It looks like some sort of distal disseminated deposit. Is it Carlinish? Maybe. Who knows what to make of it. But Southeast China has a lot more intrusion-related potential. We had subduction at starting at 170 million years old. We have a whole series of smallish copper porphyries here, but one big one, Deshing, which is right up here. And Deshing also is the second largest tonnage of gold in any porphyry in China. It's the only one outside of Tibet with more than 100 tons of porphyry material. We had subduction up till about 140 million years, and then the slab started rolling back. But there was a tear right here where South China collided with North China. And this is where we have a whole series of 140 million year old porphyries in what's called the Yangtze River Belt. And the porphyries aren't as important as the iron copper skarns here. They have a huge gold endowment of 800 tons gold. This is the major intrusion-related gold system in China. There's 6 or 7 giant skarn deposits and many small ones, all about 140 million. And eventually the slab rolled all the way back, and we had extension, and we have basin and range topography right here along the southeast coast of China. And we formed some Lake Yanshanian epithermal deposits, which includes the largest individual deposit, Xinjiang Shan, which is a high sulfidation epithermal deposit. It's been studied by many workers, really good studies by a lot of the codes workers over the last 10 years or so. It's all been mined pretty much for oxide ore. That's why it's been so successful for 300 tons, about 7.5 tons per year. So it was been China's biggest producer for a long time. But they've pretty much mined out the oxide. They're down into the copper now. It's now a copper porphyry that is relatively poor in gold. And so whether or not any of these have other potential, because most of these are porphyries and tend to be below the oxide gold area, there may not be a lot of epithermal potential left in that part of Southeast China. Finally, moving into the Cenozoic, we can look at deposits along sutures here in Tibet and coming down into Yunnan. There's a whole series of small orogenic gold deposits that are 50 to 30 million years old. Some of these are supposedly 1, 2, 3 million ounces. I've been to a bunch of these. They're probably more like 100,000, 200,000, maybe 300,000 ounces. Numbers are pretty elevated for what you see when you look at the workings. Also in the same area, I mentioned earlier, we have the Tibet-Yunnan copper porphyries. Most of these younger tertiary porphyries lack significant gold. The significant gold is up here in a number of porphyries in northwest Tibet and down here in Yunnan Jiming Yang again and Dave Cook talk about these in their recent paper in the SEG volume. And there's 4 or 5 of these with 100 to 250 tons gold in these. And those are the older porphyries. Those are the Mesozoic, not the Cenozoic porphyries. They have limited gold. And these are the deposits, except for Desching, number 1, 3, 4, and 5, are the 4 of the 5 deposits with more than 100 tons gold in porphyries in China are among those in Tibet. Finally, the youngest gold deposits in China are on Taiwan. There's a belt of orogenic gold deposits in a slate belt through the middle of Taiwan. These are probably 2-3 million years old. They resemble what you see on the South Island of New Zealand along the Alpine Fault, where Dave Cross talked about some of the young orogenic deposits. And they were responsible for some small plasters along the coast. Also, here on the northern tip of Taiwan, there's a very young, recent recent Pacific Arc deposit. It's a high sulfidation epithermal deposit. No lights were in a bunch on it. There's probably about 3 million ounces were taken out of here, and there's still another 1 million ounces remaining, but it won't be mined because this has now become a historic mining park. So to summarize what we know about China's gold, China produces about 1/7 of the world's gold. Despite every year you see some crazy paper talking about Archean, 2.5 billion year old deposits or whatever. There really is no convincing data that any gold mineralization in China is of significance is older than 450 million years. 75% of China's gold is orogenic gold, 25% is intrusion-related, porphyry, skarn, epithermal. The gold formed really in 2 events. In the Paleozoic, as we closed the Paleotethnian or Paleo-Asian oceans, and we formed orogenic gold in the Central Asian orogenic belt, and in many of those deposits in Southwest China, the Chilean mounds and the West Chinling mounds. In the Cretaceous, we started to form giant deposits in Eastern China, especially where in Jiaodong and the East Chinling, when we started having those events in the North China block. We had Jurassic Cretaceous extension, and that also led to some mid to late Mesozoic magmatic gold in Northeast and Southeast China. There are 2 supposed Carlin provinces in China. I don't believe those are Carlin provinces. Orogenic gold is at least 3/4 of China's endowment, produces about 300 tons of gold per year. The ores are mainly Paleozoic to early Triassic and where the Tethyan basins closed, and late Mesozoic circum-Pacific, small amount in the Himalayan. There are no orogenic deposits older than Middle Paleozoic. The youngest are on Taiwan. Are the North China block ores unique? They're unique in that they're young deposits in old rocks, but also the North China block is the one craton on planet Earth that has died and is no longer a craton, is a Precambrian block. It lost its thick lithospheric mantle. So in a way it's unique, but it's not really unique. The Yujiang Basin, do they fit the orogenic model? I think many of those deposits in there do. And finally, how economically realistic are some of the giant new resource numbers? We see some of the, like the Yangshan belt there. We know that number's fictitious. The numbers may be real, north of Jiaodong in the Bohai Sea, but how real are they if this is 3 times as deep as anything being mined on land right now? So you got to take all that into consideration. And a few last slides. These are the world's 20 or so biggest orogenic gold deposits presently. And you can see we've had a real change in the last decade or 2 to mining large tonnage, low grade deposits for orogenic gold, approaching what we mine gold bearing porphyries at. Given all the expense, especially with sustainability of mining orogenic gold, small high grade deposits are not as profitable now to a large extent as some of these large tonnage deposits for large companies. These are the biggest orogenic gold deposits in China, except for that one I showed you that was an open pit. They're all up here. As China moves to more open pit, I think they're going to move out this way, and I see China's gold endowment and production increasing. And finally, just the ages of orogenic gold, some maybe 400. Certainly in Xinjiang, as we get in Northwest China, we're looking at late Paleozoic orogenic gold. If we look where Indochina collides with South China, and where South China collides with North China, we have our Triassic deposits. And then we move to the Circum-Pacific, and we have our giant gold resource, and then we have a lesser resource in the Himalayas. So that sort of summarizes what we know about orogenic gold. I just throw this up if anyone's more interested in China. I have a much more extensive paper in this SEG book. Noel White has a paper on epithermal deposits in China. Yang and Dave Cook have a paper on porphyry deposits in China. And then Zhao Shan has a paper on skarn deposits in China. And if you're interested in China's ore deposits, this is the book to look at. All the chapters were put together with leading Chinese authors and one Western author. And it really is the most sane, up-to-date description of mineral deposits in China. And with that, I think I'm done, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting. I loved all the photos at the start. It looks like you've had some great adventures over there. I'd love to go sometime.